In the very heart of Seoul rises a great Gothic-style cathedral, Myeongdong Cathedral, the symbol and spiritual center of the Catholic Church in Korea. Today, Myeongdong is a bustling district filled with crowds. But some 240 years ago in the Joseon period, it was where the first Catholic community in Korea was born, and where that fledgling community faced its first trials, marking the starting point of the history of the Catholic Church in Korea. How was it possible that, in Joseon where there was not a single priest, lay people themselves could found the church? To trace that process, we must first look at the diplomatic missions to China known as the Yeoningsa. During the Joseon dynasty, Korea's foreign policy was known as Sitijurin, serving the great and cultivating relations with neighbors. Serving the great referred to relations with China, while cultivating relations with neighbors referred to ties with other surrounding countries. On occasions such as the winter solstice, the New Year, and the Emperor's birthday, Joseon sent envoys to the imperial capital of Beijing, and these missions were called Yeoningsa. Among these, the Dongjisa, which left in the 11th lunar month and returned the following April, was the most representative. These embassies were not only diplomatic missions but also channels for cultural and intellectual exchange. Envoys who went to Beijing met Western missionaries and obtained works of Western learning translated into classical Chinese on astronomy, mathematics, and geography. Among these books, Catholic catechisms and prayer texts were also brought into Joseon. At first, Western learning meant new knowledge from the West, especially sciences such as astronomy and calendrical calculation, including Catholic teaching. However, once the persecutions of Catholicism began, the term Western learning gradually came to refer to the Catholic faith itself. So the Western learning we mention here covers a broader range than the Western learning spoken of later in the era of persecution. In Joseon, Western learning began to be studied in earnest by the realist scholar Seong-ho Yeik. He highly valued Western science and technology and selectively accepted Catholic writings from the perspective of supplementing Confucianism. Among his disciples, some embraced Western science and technology while rejecting Catholicism, whereas others went on to accept Catholicism as their faith. Figures such as Yi Biaok and the brothers Guan Chul Sin encountered not only Western astronomy and mathematics but also the new concept of God as Chunju, and they began to show interest in Catholicism, holding study gatherings and learning together. In particular, Yi Biaok delved deeply into books on Western learning and studied Catholic doctrine. When he heard that his close friend Yi Seung-hun would accompany his father, appointed as chief secretary of the Dongjisa mission, to Beijing, he asked Yi Seung-hun to visit a Catholic church in Beijing, receive baptism, and bring back catechisms and sacred objects. In the winter of 1783, Yi Seung-hun went to Beijing and, in the spring of the following year, received baptism from the Jesuit Father Grammont, returning as the first baptized Catholic of Joseon. Yi Biaok studied the books that Yi Seung-hun had brought back and, through them, came to recognize the truths of the Catholic faith. He then explained the doctrine to the brothers Jeong Yak Joan and Jeong Yak Yong and to the brothers Guan Chul Sin and Guan Il Sin, and began to proclaim the gospel to members of the middle class such as Kim Bom-yu, Cho Chang-hyun, Cho In-gil, and Ji Huang. In the winter of 1784, they celebrated the first baptismal ceremony at Yi Biaok's house near Supyo Bridge. Yi Biaok, Jeong Yak Joan, Jeong Yak Yong, Guan Il Sin, and others received baptism from Yi Seung-hun, forming a community of faith, and this moment is regarded as the beginning of the Catholic Church in Korea. As the number of the faithful grew after this first baptism, it became difficult to hold gatherings in Yi Biaok's house. They therefore moved their meetings to the house of Kim Bom-yu, located in Myeongbang in front of the Royal Music Office, Janggakwan. This community is known as the Myeongbang community. From the end of 1784 this community met regularly in Myeongbang, but the following spring one of their gatherings was discovered, and they faced their first trial. In the spring of 1785, under the leadership of Yi Biaok, Yi Sung-han, Jong Yak-jong, Jong Yak-yong, and Gwon Il-sin and his son were holding a religious meeting in Kim Bom-yu's house. When constables of the Ministry of Justice, passing by, mistook it for a gambling den and suddenly burst in. This incident is known as the Yulsa Autumn Tribunal Incident. Yulsa refers to the cyclical year name for 1785. Autumn Tribunal refers to the Ministry of Punishments, the government office in charge of criminal cases and trials during the Joseon dynasty. The Yulsa Autumn Tribunal incident marks the first appearance of Catholicism in Joseon's official records and can be regarded as the first persecution. The faithful present at the gathering were taken to the Ministry of Punishments, and their books and holy images were confiscated. To prevent the affair from escalating, the Minister of Punishments, Kim Hwa-jin, released all the young nobles with a warning, and imprisoned and interrogated only the homeowner, the middle-class layman Kim Bom-yu. Kim Bom-yu bore witness to his faith to the end and was exiled to Myeongdong. Even in exile he continued to evangelize, but he eventually died from the after effects of the punishment he had suffered. After being released, Gwon Il-sin went back to the Ministry of Punishments with fellow believers such as Yi Yun-ha and Yi Chong-yuk. They demanded the release of Kim Bom-yu and the return of the confiscated sacred objects. Because of their strong protests, an incident that might have been quietly buried became widely known in the royal court and among the scholar officials, causing a great stir. The Myeongbang affair ended at that time with only Kim Bom-yu being punished. Yet as a consequence, Yi Biaok was forcibly isolated from others by his family and died in 1786. Other noble believers such as Yi Sung-han also yielded to family pressure and stayed away from the church for a time. Although this first community was dispersed for a while, they later came together again and resumed their life of faith. The Catholic faith then spread to the regions of Gyeonggi, Cheongshang, and Jeolla. The small flame that had been lit in Myeongbang eventually spread throughout all of Joseon. Time passed, and by 1898, after a long tunnel of persecution, the Catholic Church in Korea finally obtained freedom of faith. The church decided to build a cathedral on Jonghyun, the Belridge Hill of Old Myeongbang, the area now known as Myeongdong. Thus the fervent first breath of the Myeongbang community rose again, after 100 years, in the form of the great Myeongdong Cathedral. Preparations to build a church on this historic hill of Jonghyun first began in 1882 under Bishop Blanc. Because it was a high hill overlooking the capital, the project faced much opposition from the court and many obstacles, but in 1887 groundwork finally began. The design and supervision were entrusted to Father Coast, and after his death Father Pointle took over the work. In May 1898, under the presiding of Bishop Mutil, the historic rite of consecration was finally celebrated. On the main facade of Myeongdong Cathedral, the faith life of the early Korean Catholics is depicted in relief. At the top is Blessed Father James Jo Wen-mo, the first foreign priest, a Chinese priest, sent to the Korean Church. To his right is Blessed Jeong Yak-jong, who served as president of the lay association Myeongdong-gil. In the center are missionaries wearing traditional conical hats and faithful fleeing from persecution. At the lower left is a Korean-style image of the Madonna and Child, and at the right the works of the Holy Infants Society caring for children and the elderly are portrayed. Inside the church, beyond the transept, along the side walls, scenes from the early church in Korea are displayed. There you can see a sacred painting of the Myeongdong community, portraits of Yi Byeok and Kim Bom-yu, a painting of the beatification of the Korean martyrs, and portraits of Yi Sung-hun and Father Andrew Kim Tae-gon. These images are not mere decoration. They remind us that the roots of this grand cathedral lie in the small alley community of Myeongdong some 240 years ago. Beneath the main altar, in the crypt, lies a burial site. Here rest 5 saints who were martyred in the Jihi persecution, including Bishop Im Bird and Fathers Mobant and Chaston. Together with the relics of 4 other martyrs, including victims of the Myeongdong persecution. Myeongdong Cathedral stands firm today because it is founded upon the sacrifice of these martyrs laid to rest in its deepest place. Ordinarily, the faith is spread by foreign missionaries who enter a country. But in Korea, it was lay people who read catechisms and raised up the faith themselves. This spontaneous origin is one of the most remarkable and distinctive features of the Catholic Church in Korea, unparalleled elsewhere in the world. In a barren land without a single missionary, the first believers set out on their own in search of the truth. The prayers in Myeongdong, where nobles and commoners shared fraternal love beyond status and class, were by no means in vain. The great journey that began 240 years ago in a small alley of Joseon is engraved today in every red brick of Myeongdong Cathedral.